Taking care of business Saturday mornings, WHP 580 Michael Parks, along with the rest of the Saturday morning crew, taking care of our local businesses, spotlighting and showcasing them, learning about their products and services, and a lot of times some of the products and services you may not be aware of here in central Pennsylvania. If you are an athlete, if you have an athlete as a son or daughter, granddaughter, grandson, and if that athlete happens to be diabetic, stay tuned for the next half hour. We're going to talk with the experts at CPRS Physical Therapy to talk about the diabetic athlete. And joining us today is Dan Stone from CPRS Physical Therapy. Dan, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to be here again.
Hey, for some of the folks, we were talking before we got started. You guys have been with us from the start here on taking care of business, spotlighting and showcasing, your facility and your services and the best of the best here in central Pennsylvania. For some of the folks who aren't familiar with you, just tell us a little bit about CPRS Physical Therapy.
Yeah, we're an employee-owned physical therapy outpatient facility. We have 26 offices throughout south central Pennsylvania. We offer physical therapy, occupational therapy, wellness, health, and athletic training services throughout the area.
And go to cprsweb.com to find out more about the location nearest you and how to get in touch with them. CPRS, along with physical therapy, and you mentioned this briefly, you guys work with, a number of the sports teams, City Islanders, and athletes and athletic trainers and things like that. So working with the athlete and taking care of the athlete is a huge part of what CPRS is all about.
Absolutely, yes. And the diabetic part of it is definitely something that we've had a specialized niche in recently, and that's what why we're here today.
Well, let's talk about diabetes. I mean, we did a show on this with you guys a while back. It's one of these things where it affects a lot more people than we hear about.
Yeah, actually about 20% of the population age 65 and over has diabetes, but we're going to hone in specifically on type 1, juvenile onset diabetes. That's where we see a lot more prevalence in the younger population and those who are participating in sports and athletic events. And about 1% of the population has type 1 diabetes.
Okay. And obviously, you guys have found out about this. How did you all of a sudden come upon this? I mean, have you noticed that, like when some of the athletes who've come in to train with you or just been questions coming in and you found out, it was like saying, wow, it's like, there are a lot of athletes out there with juvenile diabetes.
Yeah, there are. It's definitely a growing epidemic.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more prevalent.
Do we know why or?
There's some theories. There's some interesting facts on it. In Finland, there's actually a tenfold diagnosis of type 1 athletes as compared to countries that are more sunlight, and Scandinavian countries. And it's more believed to be a vitamin D deficiency is a theory as to why. There's some theory with something nutritionally that might be causing that, but it's an autoimmune disease that attacks the pancreas and stops the insulin producing cells from working.
And, before all of a sudden, when you hear that diagnosis, of diabetes, but it's not, and we're going to learn about, having diabetes, type 1 diabetes, it should not hinder you into what you want to do and all the goals in your life.
Yes. And and why we specialize in diabetes in particular, there are 3 cornerstones to diabetes management: medication, nutrition, and physical activity.
Got it.
And as far as professional advice, there's a lot out there for meeting with dietitians, meeting with physicians to discuss medications. But there's not a lot out there as far as providing advice regarding exercise and activity, and it's a huge cornerstone in management of diabetes.
Well, I'm sure that I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but I mean, approximately, how many athletes we have here in the region, or that have diabetes.
Well, I've actually personally throughout the years have worked with many.
Yeah.
Usually at any one local high school at any one time. Usually most of the athletic trainers that I run into are working from anywhere from 3 to 8 athletes that have type 1 diabetes.
Wow. And that's important because, from a coach's standpoint and from the trainers and the people who deal with these athletes, there has to be, special attention, which is the reason why, you and CPRS have put together this program to help support their athletes, right?
Yes. And there's a lot of considerations as it relates to managing it because it is such a complicated disease.
Yeah. Professional athletes, I mean, obviously there probably are some, a lot of professional athletes out there who are, have diabetes.
Well, the big one in the news recently was Jay Cutler, the quarterback for the Broncos, was diagnosed actually while he was playing. And many, many others from all different kinds of sports. From there's Olympic cyclist champions and Ironman champions. Wade Wilson, NFL quarterback. There must be something with the quarterback position. Many NFL, pro baseball players. Ty Cobb had diabetes. Smokin' Joe Frazier had diabetes. We also had Adian Marples, who's an Ironman triathlete, had it.
Wow.
Missy Foy was on the U.S. Olympic triathlon team, was diagnosed not too long ago, actually, while she was in training as well. And a lot of these people are actually being diagnosed. We're seeing some later diagnoses in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
I actually wrestled with a guy who was a national champion for us at Messiah College.
Wow.
3 years ago. He gave me a call, and he was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 30.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see more and more. It's not just happening in their teens. We're starting to see a lot of people who have been active and have been diagnosed a little later in their later in the stage.
Right.
And it's wrecking their athletic goals and dreams.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've had several people contact me to say, what do I do?
Right.
Even though they've already been heavily involved in their sport.
Right. But I think what you want to point out and tell our listeners today, especially those who are affected, who are athletes and who are diabetes, and in fact, anybody who has diabetes, it's not an end all. It's, you can continue to have a great life and you can become a very, very good athlete. But the whole thing is, as you're going to tell us about, is just preparations and maintenance.
Yeah, and there are so many considerations. It is a complex disease. As we mentioned, the three main cornerstones, they all work together in managing blood sugar control. And anybody with diabetes can do anything. It's just more intensive. There definitely has to be more considerations and a lot more effort on that athlete's part to make sure that they're managing their blood sugar.
All right, so let's talk about that because as you mentioned, with people with diabetes, one of the things that doctors and the medical professionals and you guys recommend is a good exercise regimen. What kind of preparations does an athlete with diabetes have to make to prepare for physical activity? Is there certain preparations?
Yeah, and the biggest cornerstone with that is blood sugar management.
Okay.
A lot of people with diabetes, when I see them and ask them, how's your blood sugar doing? They might test once a day. An athlete with diabetes is a different story. I've had athletes that have come up to me with different sporting events that test their blood sugar 25 times a day. They have to see trends. They have to determine on if they have to make any dietary changes, if they have to cut back on medication. But trends with blood sugar is the biggest preparation that has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. Has this been addressed, or is this the reason why you and CPRS are getting so involved in this? I mean, over the years, have our schools trained to help work with athletes with diabetes, or?
Well, we're trying to improve that, and that's why we are talking about it. I believe it is it's a misunderstood disease as it relates to the physical activity component of it. For example, it's not uncommon to have physicians recommend some medication alterations that are very much in a textbook approach, which are very helpful, but activity guidelines really throw a lot of those suggestions out of play. Mm-hmm. For example, I've had an athlete that would take 1 unit of insulin to drop their blood sugar 30 points. When they exercise, 1 unit of insulin drops their blood sugar 100 points. They're a cyclist, and then when they would do that for a 60-minute cycle ride, they're noticing this trend that really is blowing a proportion what their insulin normally does.
Right. So I guess that's probably my next question. You mentioned some of the athletes, professional athletes who have diabetes. Football players, triathletes. It obviously would make a difference on which sport they're participating in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're our power athletes or our explosive athletes have to take different considerations. Typically, those athletes sometimes actually have to either increase their medication prior to an athletic event because of the adrenaline that occurs, and our endurance athletes usually have to cut back on medication just based on the properties that happen physiologically in the body. So, the demands of the sport definitely are correlating to the modifications that have to be made with activity. And that's why it's so complicated. There's no one textbook approach on how to change medications and nutrition habits to prepare for an athletic event.
Obviously, there has to be some safety precautions, too, involved with the diabetic athlete.
Yeah, our athletic trainers all usually carry cake icing in their kit. They carry some sort of glucose to help in case the diabetic athlete has a hypoglycemic event or they have any issues in that regard. And then also our athletic trainers are aware of the symptoms that are associated with what's called hyperglycemia, or when an athlete has extreme high blood sugars, and knowing the safety precautions of when to participate and when not to participate. So there are a lot of guidelines out there that do need to be followed to keep the athlete safe.
Cake icing. Really? Actually, a cake icing? That's one of the...
Cake icing, absolutely. It's a great, convenient thing to keep in the kit. It takes a long time to expire. If an athlete would actually become unconscious, it will dissolve under the tongue.
Wow.
There's been a lot of concern regarding the use of what's called glucagon, which is an injectable medication for athletes with who become unconscious, as far as whether or not professionals or employees of the school can administer that. So that's actually been in kind of a legal debate recently.
Wow.
So to avoid that legal debate, the use of cake icing has come into play, as far as not worrying about using injectable medication, but a nice, effective, convenient, easy way to help an athlete who would perhaps become unconscious.
If you're an athlete with diabetes, does it or can it affect your physical performance?
Absolutely.
Really?
And if blood sugar is too low, you can't think. So it's very difficult for an athlete to become focused. They become weak, shaky. If a blood sugar is too high, dehydration occurs, fatigue occurs very quickly. So it's very important for an athlete to keep an optimal blood sugar range. And that's the balancing act that can make it very challenging. They don't want their blood sugar too high or too low.
Now, you just had, just this past Thursday, CPRS Physical Therapy had a lecture series on the diabetic athlete. It was held at the Heart of Lancaster Hospital and dealt with something like that. I mean, obviously, and that's the reason why you came on with us on WHP 580, to get the word out, because obviously there are a lot of people out there who aren't aware of what's going on and how to maintain it. Is that the whole purpose of what you guys are trying to get across here?
Yeah, and we're trying to establish some support groups. We're actually partnering with an organization in California. It's called Insulin Dependence, and they merged with an organization that used to be called the Diabetes Exercise and Sport Association, and we're joining them as a corporate member. And our goal with that is to have support groups for athletes with diabetes where they can gather and exercise and participate in cycling, running, perhaps adventure sports like rock climbing, and bounce ideas off of each other on how to manage blood sugar during physical activity. Now,
why did you adopt this baby?
Well, I actually have personal experience. I have type 1 diabetes myself.
Okay.
This has been a passion of mine as a high school athlete, and I actually wrestling was my main passion, and I did that as well in college. And when I look at some of the things, I had to use myself as an experimental lab rat in many ways, and I didn't have a professional guide, person to help me. And in high school, I really went through a lot of misery, and I fell short of a lot of my athletic goals. And I really attribute that to poor diabetes control, just due to lack of understanding and misunderstanding on how to manage the disease.
Yeah.
When I got to college and I learned a lot of tricks and really was able to come up with some good guidelines on how to manage it, really positively affected my performance, and it really that's what really started and drove my passion with this area.
Back then, were there support groups, or was this talked about? There wasn't too much talk about this, or?
No, not to this extent. There were support groups at some local hospitals. Most of the time, the discussion really stemmed around nutrition, or it stemmed around, and there was some mild discussion with exercise and activity. And I actually ran into a gentleman outside of Philadelphia that was an exercise physiologist. His name is Gary Shiner, and he's now actually internationally known in regarding to this topic, and he's the person who really drove a lot of this interest and passion in pursuing what we do, at least in the Harrisburg area, and tried to really facilitate what they have in the Philadelphia area. So there are people that are doing this. There are, especially through what used to be called the Diabetes Exercise and Sport Association, there are passionate individuals that physical exercise and diabetes management is concerned. It's just something that we're trying to get into this area and really try to promote it more like it has been in other areas.
Well, I'm so glad that we were able to help get the word out. Again, folks, if you're listening out there, if you are an athlete with diabetes or know of an athlete with diabetes and are not aware of how it can affect and impact you and how to maintain it during your athletic pursuits, it should not have to hinder you. There is a way of maintaining it, and there are support groups and information, and it's available right here in our region at CPRS Physical Therapy. Learn more by going to their website. To go to cprsweb.com. And of course, you can call a couple of numbers and they'll get you in touch with Dan and find out how you can get the help that you need. Local number 717-697-4208. Toll-free number 866-279-6999. Of course, all those numbers on the website is cprsweb.com, and we'll have all of those on our website too. And you can hear this interview again. Go to WHP580.com, click on air, then Michael Parks. We'll continue our conversation with Dan Stone, the diabetic athlete, CPRS physical therapy. We are taking care of business on Saturday mornings on WHP. Taking care of business, Saturday mornings, WHP 580, Michael Parks, along with Dan Stone from CPRS Physical Therapy. Today we are talking about athletes with diabetes, the diabetic athlete, and the good news is that CPRS, there is help for you, advice, expert advice, professional advice from the guys and the folks who are just the best of the best and help area athletes. And Dan knows this personally, of the what you have to do when you're an athlete and if you have diabetes. So what is it that you want the people to know about, who are listening out there right now?
We want to know that there is support. There's information out there. There are other people who have a lot of great ideas and great experiences, which is very valuable, and sometimes every bit as much so as the healthcare professional's advice. That's where I personally have gotten a lot of my advice is through those support groups and through those different ideas from other people who are struggling with this disease, and we're trying to facilitate that. That's our biggest goal, is to try to encourage and just put this information out there for people who may not know it exists. In addition to that, we do have some professional avenues in which an individual can pursue more information. We have what's called our Healthy Lifestyles program at all of our locations, in which an individual can come and exercise, and there's a huge educational component with that as far as a fitness assessment and evaluation. And we've used this avenue on a lot of our athletes with diabetes as well.
And the bottom line is, while we're talking about the athletes with diabetes, as you mentioned, and what I've learned is that anyone with diabetes, that exercise, good physical exercise, and is an important part, an integral part of maintaining and taking care of the disease. Correct?
This is an important topic for not just someone who's an athlete, but this is important for anybody who participates in physical activity and exercise, which should be anybody who has diabetes. Yeah. If I've talked with several individuals that aren't in a formal team sport, but are trying to train for a 5K, or they're just trying to be more fit, more healthy, and they want to understand how to do that successfully and manage their blood sugar safely, especially people who are taking insulin.
One of the things, Dan, that I'm hearing about is, and you've experienced firsthand, is a young child or a child being diagnosed with, type 1 diabetes. Then all of a sudden they think their life's over and they can't do the things that they love, especially when it comes to sports.
Oh, I've ran into so many young kids that won't participate. They're fearful because, diabetes is a nasty disease. It's complicated, and it really prevents a lot of young people from participating. I sense fear in a lot of young people that they don't know what to do or how to do a particular sport or activity or athletic event. And that is our passion, and that's really what we want to try to change. Not just the people who are participating in athletic events currently, but young people out there that are fearful to participate. We want to encourage them that you can do this. Yeah. You can, whether it's a team sport or an adventure activity, whether it's, going out on a bike ride or a run or competing in an triathlon or going rock climbing. You can do these things safely and effectively without having concern and having blood sugar get in the way. How
old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was 13.
13. Same thing with you, but you were always an athlete, right?
I was actually, becoming diagnosed actually made me more intensive of an athlete. I was just played Little League and did the regular sport thing as a kid, and activity no longer became a luxury, or it became a necessity. And I think that was the huge defining moment where the diabetes diagnosis actually increased my activity level.
Well, I think that's very, very important, and it's so great that you guys are actually getting the word out and helping people, because there are probably people just like you are out there just like searching for the answers and trying to find out if they're the right answers. And it all depends on, as we've learned here, depends on the person, depends on the sport, what they're doing. And so a lot of those variables and questions, a lot of the answers. And as you mentioned, there's a great support group being offered. CPRS Physical Therapy. Learn more how to get in touch with them and learn more about the diabetic athlete and the support program. Go to the website, cprsweb.com, or else call one of the locations nearest you. They'll get you in touch with Dan and find out how you can get involved in the program and get more of the answers. Local number 697-4208, 866-279-6999. All the contact information on our website, WHP580.com. Click on air. Then Michael Parks. Dan, great seeing you. Thanks so much for sharing this great information with us.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
All right, we're going to take a break for news and information. That'll do it for us for this week. Stick around. Medical Matters is coming up next, followed by the Plant Doctor, and I will talk with you next Saturday morning at 7. I'm Michael Parks, and we are taking care of business on Saturday mornings on WHP.